All right. Yael, you're here, which is great, and
Yes.
your audio is working. Excellent. Well, thank you very much for joining us. We are really excited to speak with you. And I got to tell you, Adam, did you check out this talk that
Yes,
she
I
gave
really
on
enjoyed
mediocrity?
it. Delightful talk.
I loved it.
Somebody found it. Oh, boy.
Oh my God, I loved it. Yeah, so I mean, we can obviously talk about mediocrity as well, but just so for others, the theme of the talk, this is like a very quick lightning talk, right? Yeah, this is like a
I think I did
5 minute
that
talk,
like a decade ago. I hope it's not horrible. I haven't looked back at it.
It holds up just as mediocre.
It is.
Oh boy.
No, I
think it's
actually think it's
delightful. Don't get me
great.
wrong.
I
Yeah,
actually
it's wonderful.
Man.
No, I actually, I think that, I mean, the whole theme of the talk is like, you can, by doing things, you can get better at things. And I loved your line. You had a bunch of great lines there that I love. One is, I promise no matter how bad a gardener you are, you will be able to grow food that you can eat. And I thought it was great. Like, it was just the whole message was like, hey, you can actually do things on your own. And I feel it's a message that kids especially need, because they are so used to this expectation that they're going to be that, boy, you shouldn't play soccer unless you're going to be, a soccer player in college, or you shouldn't, and it's just great to have folks encouraging us to just
I feel like a lot of
things.
stuff I'm really bad at, I enjoy. Like, I'm really bad at jujitsu, but I love it because I can get out of my head and like it kind of works muscles, not like literally, but things that I don't normally work on. Like, I'm out of my head and breathing. So yeah,
I loved your line. Like, you might be mediocre at playing guitar, but you'll be fun at parties.
That was great.
You must have gone to like the third page of Google or something.
Yeah, we were going for the deep cuts.
This is an early hit for you. I got to tell you, this is, I don't want to say that this is going to be, this is a claim to fame, but this is an early hit for you. We're not going that deep into the deep cuts, but it's a great talk. It should be. So I'm going to attempt to make a segue from that excellent talk to this terrific paper that you wrote for Consumer Reports, because you are in that talk, you are really trying to encourage more people to do things. And in this paper, you are really trying to encourage more people to do a specific class of things, namely implement in memory safe languages. So I love the tone of this paper. But before we get to it, I think that the question that is burning for me, Adam, I imagine for you as well, and maybe Steve, you know the answer to this, but I'd love to hear this. What is the history of this? How did Consumer Reports, how was this conceived of, doing this report?
I loved your last podcast, by the way. I don't think anybody has raved about anything I've written that much, so that was really exciting for me. But I think you had guessed that it was ISRG, but actually, I think I was reading Alex Gaynor's blog and like the Fish in a Barrel.
Mm-hmm.
And just realizing like, oh my God, this is a really high percentage of bugs, and that's alarming. And why isn't everybody talking about this? But also I've done, like, my background is investigative reporting, and I'm always, whenever there's a Pegasus or something like it, I'm always panicking, and I'll find, like, this time it was a friend of mine who was helping me try to figure out if I had Pegasus on my phone, because I had done some investigative stories and I was a little bit worried about it. I think it was Jonathan Rudenberg, and I was like, is this on my phone? And this was before it was easier. I think like Trail of Bits came out with an app, and like Amnesty International or something. This was like before that had happened, where like, they really had to talk me through the steps of doing it. And I remember like at the end of our conversation, they said, until we figure out memory safety, like we can't really prevent the next Pegasus. And I'm like, wow, like that's alarming. And, I run this, I manage Security Planner, which is a digital security tool that helps people figure out how to be safer online without necessarily needing a technical background. And I'm like, there's nothing we can tell people to do. There is no setting that they can click on to prevent this. There's no, there's nothing they can buy. Like, it's like, I find that alarming. And then just the intersection that it's had with things that I care about, like, journalism, patient safety, human rights activism, etc., and just consumer safety. I'm like, I don't know, like, I'm like, and then there was like targeting of like Uyghur forums, and just the way that it intersected with like every vulnerability that I had heard of and was upset about, and I just kept bugging people and being like, we should really do something about memory safety.
That's great. I mean, obviously, I would actually like to understand a little bit, because Pegasus is something that was, in the kind of the sea of vulnerabilities, something I'd heard of but wasn't really paying close attention to. But it sounds like Pegasus was much closer to home for you. Is that because of your experience as a journalist? Were you worried that you were being explicitly targeted?
Possibility. It's something that, I mean, your worst nightmare is like you are working on a story and your source or somebody gets arrested or tortured or imprisoned. And like, yeah,
Right.
NSL
Yeah,
group was
wow.
specifically targeting activists like my sources or journalists, and so yeah, it was I was totally panicking. But it was my
Well, and I think that's interesting, because you think in your line of work, you've got like people's actual physical safety on the line here with a vulnerability. We don't always kind of directly connect vulnerabilities to physical safety, but in this case, it's pretty easy to draw that line.
Yeah, I've been pretty lucky. I was I was traveling and I got a call from a text from an editor who was like, "Call me right away," and I was really worried that somebody had been tortured or arrested, but they just like wanted me to delete a tweet or something. And I'm like, "Oh my God, don't like tell me to talk to me immediately without." Yeah.
Oh God, isn't that the worst?
For a freelance assignment I was doing,
I
I'm
know.
like, please don't like make me think there's an emergency without saying, like, I don't consider that an emergency.
So Brian and I at least both share this kind of anxiety, and so we have a really good working relationship, because it's like, never send me a chat that's just like, can we talk? Like, I'm always like, hey Brian, don't worry, this is not a terrible thing, like, but also, I'd like to like catch up soon about whatever, and like vice versa. And so it's good to
Or if people
establish
like
that.
set up a meeting without telling me what it's about first, I'm like, oh no.
Yeah.
Well, you can always tell, just bluntly, if people have led a team before, because it's the ones that led a team that are especially sensitive to, like, hey, don't worry, it's nothing bad. And I do always try to do that, because, yeah, it's just easy to be like, hey, can you chat later? It's like, okay, oh my God, I'm immediately in my worst nightmare. I actually had a manager once who's like, hey, this is on a Friday afternoon. Are you going to be in on Monday? And of course, this is in the era before remote work. So it's like, I'm in on every Monday and I have no schedule. Yes, I'm going to be on Monday. I'm like, is there something wrong? He's like, we'll talk about it on Monday.
Sleep
tight. It's like 4 p.m.
Funny. I scheduled a bunch of emails on for Monday morning, because I wanted to email a bunch of people on Friday, and I'm like, I probably shouldn't send this to them on a Friday afternoon before the Super Bowl weekend, so they're panicking all weekend and like freaking out before Monday. So I'll just schedule it for like Monday at 8 a.m. or whatever.
Yeah, good on you. And yes, don't always give people full context when you need to chat with them. And then if it's deleting a tweet, like maybe that can wait. That feels like that's not. It doesn't feel like we need to make you sweat over the physical safety of one of your sources because we want you to delete a tweet that someone found to be a little too raw.
This was weird. It was a freelance client, and it wasn't a tweet about anything that I was writing about. But I don't know. It was weird, but it happened.
So, because I think that, part of why I think so many folks found this work so interesting and delightful is that you've honed in on something that we as practitioners really know well, which is that the choice of language definitely does affect one's ability to not have vulnerabilities. There is very much a correlation, and it is an underreported story. I think the folks that are talking about it tend to be more not writing for Consumer Reports, put it that way. So did you pitch this to Consumer Reports as something that hey, this is something that we should talk about? How did you get Consumer Reports on board with doing this?
PowerPoint. I was like reading, Alex Gaynor's blog and like Chris Palmer's blog and the Fish in a Barrel Twitter and like just talking to people about this. And I wrote a memo and I made a PowerPoint and I was like, we should really do something about this. And it wasn't like a traditional. I'm actually not on the content team anymore, so it wasn't like a traditional like Consumer Reports front page story or magazine piece or anything like that. It was more like on the sort of mobilization outreach side, and I just kept like bringing it up, and I was like, we should really, really do something about this. And for a while, like I couldn't really answer the question like who else is talking about this with an answer that anybody had heard of, but then it's like everybody started talking about it. And I'm like, this is the time. So I've been talking about it internally for quite a while before we actually did something about it, and I was like, we should really do a convening because I don't want to like, what if we do something that like misses the mark, or what if we focus on something that doesn't really get at the issue, or what if we like reinvent the wheel, and so like there's just that danger of it, and I'm like, we should get everybody we know who like that we can think of in a room and talk about it and like figure out like how do we fit in and what should we be doing and that kind of thing.
And when you say a convening, is that like a Consumer Reports term? I mean, into where you deliberately kind of bring experts in?
We hosted like a 2-hour meeting, I guess. It was Chatham House Rules, and we like got a facilitator because I didn't want to facilitate. I wanted to like participate, and I have an amazing manager who like really got on board, and and we just invited everybody. We're like, can you make this date? And like and then we did like a 2-hour discussion, and so basically the report that I put out is kind of a summary of everything that we talked about. I just kind of organized it a little bit, and because it wasn't like capital J journalism, I got to get everybody's feedback who was there on it, and that really helped strengthen it because normally,
that helps a lot. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it's very good. It's very technically, it's definitely on point. You're raising a bunch of really good issues. So, I mean, it's a methodology that works really well.
I thought it was really cool to get everybody had the chance to give feedback and like point out. And so I tried to in the report point out like these are things people disagreed on, or reword it in a way that everybody who had the chance to give me feedback could kind of live with.
Yeah, so I want to get to some of the meat here. So one thing, so you've got a lot of really interesting suggestions. I definitely want to pull at, and Steve, I don't know if you had the same question, but I'm like, what about unsafe Rust? Where does unsafe? Are we going to talk about unsafe Rust in this, or are we just going to pretend that we don't have an unsafe keyword? So there's definitely that I got some questions around that. One of the, part of what I love about the approach here is that you're really advocating for transparency above all else. Is what I feel. I mean, correct me if that's maybe I'm reading into it, but a little bit what I want to read into it. But I love the appeal to public accountability and to transparency. One of the things that was news to me is that when you talk about the common vulnerability and exposures database, CVE database. I did not realize, and I know Rick is here, and Rick just kind of rolls his eyes at me being so naive for not having realized this. I did not realize that is like 100% opt-in, and there is no requirement, regulatory or like social contract or otherwise, that companies actually participate in the CVE process. And one thing that is just galling is there is no way for the consumer to know who is participating in CVEs and who isn't. Is that a problem that you've run across? Did you run across it in this work? I mean, is that because as you point out, we really, part of the way we can get going on this problem is by really understanding which CVEs are due to or would be less likely to occur in a memory safe language. But of course, that means that we've got to actually like adhere to the CVE process.
I haven't even really like one of the things that came up was that people said that they couldn't distinguish vulnerability, like even when it was in the even if it was classified, they couldn't necessarily distinguish. There wasn't enough details to know like, oh, this is a memory vulnerability or this is a logic bug. And I'm like, that's bad. Like I think it would be better if we like, how do we measure this if we the metrics we have, like we only know them for certain parts of the industry. So how do we even have like broad statistics on which vulnerabilities are due to memory unsafety? And I don't know if people are like, I was actually kind of surprised that we have as many as we do, because I feel like people wouldn't really be incentivized to share that if they're not planning on addressing
it. There's a lot of flaws in the CVE system, and that is definitely one of many parts of it.
Yeah, it's so funny. I have a textbook. I forget what it was for. It was for some certification, but I just got the book because I thought it was interesting to look stuff up in it. I think it was like Sec Plus. And I like started reading it, and this is a problem I have when I read textbooks since like high school. I'm like, the way that they talk about these systems is very different from anybody in the industry and how they talk about it. So it's like you're almost like learning this sort of sanitized version of things that like in reality everybody, or not everybody, but there's like vast kind of controversy around or disagreement with.
Yeah, as do you ever hear Larry McVoy's quote on that, Adam, where in school you always assume a frictionless surface, and then when you actually go to build things, all you work on is the friction. I feel like there's maybe an analog there.
Seems spot on. Just I mean, in terms of how gritty things get in the real world. And one of the things I was thinking about reading your piece was how some of the benefits of memory safety, I think, can feel abstract, especially for folks in university or learning or early in their careers, and then feel indelible and painful to people, who with more experience or later in their careers. But then, you speak to this point. It can be hard to kind of get off of that train and hard to sell the benefits of changing tax or accepting the risk, because there's not zero risk of making such a significant change.
Yeah, I wonder if I was kind of more. It was easier for me to kind of come to the conclusions that I have because I wasn't attached to these languages, because I have friends that are very attached to these languages. And I was thinking about that when I was rewatching Alex Gaynor's talk on memory safety and the stages of grief. I'm like, oh, I never had these because I never was attached to C++. So
Yes. I mean, I think the answer to your kind of maybe perhaps rhetorical question, but is, I think, absolutely yes. It is easier for you to kind of, because you're also taking the perspective of the consumer, and it's like, well, no, wait a minute, why are we even debating this? Like, of course we should have seatbelts. It's like, no, but some of us like haven't had seatbelts for their entire career, and they're really good drivers. It's like, and they know they're not going to get in an accident. You're like,
yeah,
do you hear yourself?
Finds it really enjoyable to code in C++. Like, he was telling me like how much he enjoys it, and I'm like, I hope I don't like ruin his life or whatever. But I mean, ultimately, I think just a friend of mine who's a developer, and I'm like, ultimately, I feel like these issues are more important.
The only person I've heard express that sentiment is Adam's teenager, and we have viewed that Adam as teenage rebellion. We view that as like, we know that he's going to grow up.
I mean, it's somewhere between teenage rebellion and poor parenting, and maybe in equal parts.
I want to make a very dry joke about like the thing about behaviors that harm communities is that it's fine if you do them, but your work doesn't impact other people. So if your friend is writing C++ in the safety of their own home and not distributing their code to anybody else, they can enjoy programming in C++ as much as they would like, as far as I'm concerned.
Steve just wants to make sure he doesn't
rather do it at home than in some God knows who where with friends of yours.
That's absolutely got some dirty alley. Absolutely,
teenager.
Absolutely, rather do it.
Exactly. I just want to know where he is when he's doing it. That's all.
Exactly. That's it. Yeah, that is not a sentiment that I think makes sense at some level, just because it represents youth more than anything else. You don't need to disclose how young your developer friend is, but I think is natural for youth to go through a period of just loving complexity almost for its own sake. And then there's actually kind of the pivot that you're kind of referring to, Adam, where you get these scars that develop. You realize, like, wait a minute, the complexity actually is the enemy, and we actually need to get rid of anything that is making this system more complicated and less comprehensible. And C++ is definitely in that category.
I do think that Yael's getting into something, though, or maybe not, again, maybe reading into words slightly, but like one of the things that I hear from that sentiment, which I think is a big problem in this, is like, you do have to convince people that like say seatbelts are necessary and good. And there are some people who like not having them. And I don't know if being like, sorry, you can't do that anymore or whatever is like the most effective rhetorical strategy for actually accomplishing the change that's desired to be brought about. Because like your friend is definitely not the only one, like as much as we would joke about it, like because I'm me, this will not be shocking to anybody, but I have our C++ tab open right now. I'm reading, and like there's this person arguing that like C++ is basically Python, and he can write C++ as easily as Python, and so like whatever, etc. And like those are arguments that I had all the time. There's a lot of people on the internet, a lot of people like different things, and so it is true that if like we want to make this change, I don't think this is specific to the Consumer Reports paper, which I think is very good, but I think there's this like weird there was a comment the other day on the C++ subreddit. Someone was like, "You can smell the fear around here these days," and people did not take that very well. But like,
was that comment obviously by you or one of your alts?
I don't. Well, actually, I do technically have an alt. It doesn't matter. The point is that don't want to get distracted. The important part is that like, we gotta figure out how to like make that change occur. Even though there's going to be people like, and they're feeling a lot of the sentiment that I see right now in the C++ community is feeling attacked and like under siege and therefore entrenching. Yeah. And that's like not actually the way that I would want to see this move forward. And so, I'll joke about, your friend shouldn't program in C++ at all or whatever, but like, I don't actually believe that. That's just like a funny way of putting that sentiment. But I also think that sometimes we make these jokes or like there are some people who are a little more hardline about it. That are kind of like serious about doing that specifically in like all circumstance. And I'm not sure that's going to like get us to the memory safe world faster or not. I'm not sure. But it's like a thing I've been thinking about lately.
So, yeah. So and this actually gets to a question I had for you, because you talk about public accountability, very important. But I will tell you that for my own personal journey, one thing that was very important for me personally was actually private accountability, in that a big wake up for me, and, not that I appreciated that C was dangerous. And discarding C++ for the moment, because I was and have been a C++ conscientious objector, but I appreciated that C was dangerous, but I also felt like I can navigate it. And the wake up call for me, the indisputable wake up call, was a vulnerability in code that I had written, that I had thought a lot about. And the vulnerability was actually, and Steve, this is when I talk about like integer safety in Rust, this is one of the things we don't talk about enough in Rust, is the integer safety, because it is, when people think about memory safety, they are often thinking about like, I'm dereferencing pointers. It's like, well, it's actually more than that. It's you have got indices that you are using to index into memory. And if those are going to be in any way untrusted and then malicious, it is actually really hard to write that code correctly. And lint won't necessarily help you. And I was shocked at the fact that I had this, that I effectively had an indexing error that lint was silent about. And that was a wake-up call for me, certainly. And so, yeah, what do you think about like connecting engineers? It's like I'm like blameless postmortems and hug ups and so on. But it's like also, hey, you should know that 15 years ago, you wrote this code that you thought was correct that introduced this really serious vulnerability, because it's actually, in fact, not correct.
For some reason, this line of questioning reminds me of that blog post that just came out, the unsafe language doom principle.
Yeah. You're not wrong.
It's like, even if you do this perfectly, here's what could happen. I don't know how. Like, for my end, I don't know the individual names and faces responsible for types of vulnerabilities, but I kind of think that it's more companies that should. I don't know. I think it's more companies that. But yeah, that's a really good question, because it's like, how do you hold individuals accountable without them kind of doubling down and getting mad?
Well, and I don't want to like put software engineers. I don't want to like I don't want to persecute software engineers. I just want to be like, hey, by the way, you should know. Like, we're not going to put you in jail. We're not even going to hold you financially responsible for all this damage that you caused. But like, maybe you should stop arguing about defending C++.
I know your terrible secrets,
because you know what I mean.
I'll tell your mother you've been writing C++.
I'm one of those people who reads like every single response to my articles on like Reddit and Twitter and etc. Like, probably too much, but yeah, no, I've been reading there. I think they were like most upset that I didn't differentiate between C and C++.
That was a bunch of it, yeah.
And then somebody accused me of posting a link twice, even though I had never posted in that forum. But
posted a link twice. Yeah. Oh, how dare you!
Gall.
That is just the gall.
And I didn't. I'm like, really, I shouldn't chime in and be like, no, I didn't.
Oh, I think you should chime in. No. Okay, by the way, Steve, you know that this is my approach to these things. Whenever you've got a discussion that's getting hot, I think it always helps for you yourself to appear. It really helps to, I think, humanize it. Be like, hey, actually, that asshole you're talking about is right here. It's me. I posted the link twice.
I didn't post the link twice. I didn't even post. But
For the
but
record,
Just to clarify.
I've had really good discussions with people who like it started out by them yelling at me on Twitter for something they thought I did wrong, and we get on a phone and like end up agreeing on like 90% of things, and I always find it really helpful. Though I'm always like very nervous before I get on the phone. But yeah, no, I think that but it's hard to talk to people. I read a book called Mistakes Were Made But Not By Me, about all the ways that people trick themselves into thinking that they didn't actually mess up. Like everybody else is responsible. Yeah, it's kind of interesting. Like I don't know how people would respond to that, because I feel like people don't like to be like, most of my broken friendships have been for me like pointing out something somebody did in what I thought was like a polite and non-confrontational way. And, like they just don't want to have that kind of discussion. So
Yeah.
Key is that I want to avoid
Yeah,
shame.
one of the things I love about this
I mean?
piece is I think that one of the ways to avoid shame is to kind of fill in the other side of it. Brian, we talk a bunch about the intrinsic motivation of engineers or even the communal motivation of engineers. But your piece talks about the other side of it, about the consumer side of it. Making analogies with the jungle or with Nader's book, Unsafe at Any Speed. I love the idea of like nutrition labels. So, maybe creating, more awareness and more kind of desire in the public at large then makes it easier for practitioners to sort of get on board and to bend, because it's not just sort of admitting some failing or whatever, but it's more of a migration on both sides of it.
it's interesting. I do feel like I'm more open to, like, if I don't feel like people are yelling at me, if they're like, oh, you worded this in a certain way, which I think could be harmful because of X, Y, and Z. We don't say dark patterns anymore. We say deceptive design. I'm like, oh, of course, I will stop saying that. But of course, like, I don't have a lot of, I'm not attached to those terms the way that some people are attached to the way that they have been doing things. So I don't, this is interesting, like theory of change discussion. Like, I don't know if I'm great at it, but I think about it a lot.
Well, just by that, it helps you be much better at it, right? Just the kind of the consciousness of it. One point that
real quick before we transition to the next thing, I want to say a great example of making this message connect and then having it actually have the change is a previous employer of mine, Cloudflare, which is basically when Cloudbleed happened. That was due to a memory unsafety situation, and that was like treated as a existential level threat to the business, and then basically ended up in a like, you start new projects, you need sign off from the CTO. I don't think that was ever an actual real policy, but like it felt that way, or that was kind of like the general attitude was like, please do not use a memory unsafe language unless you absolutely must. And now we see them deploying Rust and Go and other memory safe languages at scale, doing systems tasks that we would have previously only did in C and C++. And that by them understanding as organization that like this is a threat caused the change that made that happen. And so I don't know how many other organizations are willing to make those connections and like have management buy-in and all that stuff, but just to like put down one positive case I've seen of that actually happening in a way that's like not shaming anyone individually. Like they never said which engineer wrote that bug, and like I worked there and I'd accessed all the internal stuff much later, of course, but like I never heard who wrote it because like that's not the point, right? And so I thought that was a good example of that kind of change happening.
That's great. Yeah, and I really hope that people who are making the argument internally like can use this. And it's not the only paper, like there's a lot of momentum happening, so this isn't the only thing that they can use, but I do hope it helps them make that argument. Because I feel like even just a year ago, people are like, companies will never do this, it's expensive and hard. And I'm like, companies can do expensive and difficult things. Like, what if they see it as this will help us stay competitive? Like, we can actually stand behind our promises around privacy, security, whatever it is, and then all the other benefits too, like stability and speed and etc.
That's right. It's only expensive on one accounting, right? It's expensive through one lens. But to your point, Yael, if you take the fully burdened cost of what's it cost to maintain and own and fix and apologize and pay for recalls or whatever, then is it expensive, or then is it a push, or then are we actually saving money?
So Adam, I'm extremely proud of this joke, but are you suggesting there needs to be a total cost of ownership analysis?
Oh my God. Oh, why?
Feel free to edit that out before you publish the actual
Not a chance. That's going to go around the 10.
No. Actually, no. As a punishment for that, we are not going to edit it out. Actually, we refuse to edit it out. Actually, right. Well, so actually, it reminds me of it. And Stephen, I'm wondering if you had the same thought about this. And yeah, I don't know if you're folks of my vintage. I mean, I grew up actually with operating systems that lacked memory protection. And it does seem to be a bit of an analog in that when I was growing up, when you've got the two operating system choices, namely Windows and Mac OS, neither of them employed memory protection, even though it was present in the microprocessor. And as a result, I mean, it was very bad for the consumer. And you would lose work all the time. Your machine would just reset. And it really was awful. And when reading this, I was kind of thinking like, wait a minute. Where was Consumer Reports? Consumer Reports should have been, because it wasn't. I don't think there was any real public agency taking this kind of duopoly to task and saying, "Hey, this is neglect. This is this is malpractice. In that you've got this capacity to actually isolate these things from one another using the microprocessor, and you're not doing it." And ultimately, and we don't live in that era anymore. And we got out of it in part because the competition stepped it up, and they ultimately both Microsoft and Apple, and then of course Linux and Unix and so on, which was always memory protected, adopted memory protection, and the consumer is much, much, much better for it. So I think it is great that you're using Consumer Reports as a vehicle, to the point that it has me demanding like my youth was robbed by Bill Gates because Consumer Reports wasn't calling him out on it.
I can speak back that far, but we do like Consumer Reports has done a lot of, like, we have digital standard, like there's a lot of stuff that Consumer Reports has done on the, and I think people don't know about, to like raise the standard for connected devices and like evaluate consumer technologies and how they respect people's interests and need based on like privacy, security, ownership, etc. And so like there has been work, and I don't know, I did a whole thing on VPNs, but I think it's like all of the work that I've done that it's always a little awkward, because most of the stuff I decide to kind of like the threads I follow is because I talk to a lot of people who told me things, and most of them don't want their name used, or like it's like their employer might get mad, or they just want to have like on background or off the record conversations. But it's like I feel like there's a huge, like, if you just take what technologists say and talk about and like adapt that for a consumer audience, like there's a lot there, you know.
What? There is a lot there, and it's underreported. So we're glad you're taking it on.
What's been the reaction from the like non-tech community? Like I've seen in my communities how people have responded, but what have you gotten from people who maybe didn't really have any awareness of this topic at all?
I guess I haven't heard from people who've never thought about it, but there are people who I've brought it up to who like maybe weren't as interested. And then they were like, "Oh my God, like we should be listening to this. This has gotten a lot of play." And like, you know, NSA is talking about it now, like CISA's talking about it. This was like mentioned in the Washington Post. And so like suddenly they're kind of getting more interested, which is really, really cool. But yeah, no, I haven't heard from people who were like, who hadn't heard about it at all. Like that hasn't happened to me yet.
And so what are some of the specific thoughts? Because you got a bunch of like of concrete recommendations in here. And Adam mentioned earlier, like, and you mentioned the nutrition label. I love the nutrition label idea. It does get really complicated in a hurry. How do we navigate that? For most systems, even actually like Rust systems, are actually a hybrid of safe and unsafe code. So how would we express that, either whether it's a kind of a nutrition label or regulatory compliance? Do you kind of thoughts on how we would navigate that?
Yeah, I think that's going to be really challenging. I think I tried to point out like a lot of the challenges in the report, because I feel like there's ways that you can compare, like there's just certain things you can't really compare. They're really easy to game. And like I think that there's just such a fine line between something that would actually create change and something that would just look good on paper. Like if we told people like, oh, we want you to
Totally.
If we told companies like we want you to have a certain percentage of your code converted to memory safe language, they would just prioritize based on what's easiest, and we want them to prioritize based on risks. And so like yeah, I think this is going to be like a tough needle to thread. And I guess that's something I learned too when I was looking at VPN. My last big report was on VPNs, and I'm like, it's really hard. Like there's ways that people can sort of game any metrics that you've set and make it look like they're making change, but when you actually look at the impact on the end user, like there isn't any, or there's like very little. And
Totally.
so yeah, I think that's where I kind of lean on all the experts that I talk to, because I feel like that's the difference between us coming up with some kind of metric that doesn't make any sense. I read a book. I read this really amazing book called The Tyranny of Metrics. It's such a good book, even though I think they were a little bit. The Tyranny of
what? Sorry.
Metrics.
Ah.
Oh
Of
my
metrics,
God,
yeah,
such a good book.
interesting.
Even though I
Yeah.
think the guy who wrote it is against public records, which I disagree strongly about. But
Well, based
yeah,
on his
exactly.
metrics, he's got
metrics are
metrics that
wrong.
show.
No, I'm just
Public
kidding.
records.
No, he just talks about like ways you can set metrics and then like do well in the metrics, not even intentionally.
He's against public records? Sorry, I'm still processing that. What? How are you against public records? What does that even
He
mean?
thinks that
Against public
like
records?
certain information should be like private, and that it undermines public good when you make too many requests, because it stops people from talking publicly about certain things. Like I don't, and maybe there's a point there, but there's like a gradation.
I think it. Yeah. Like, I guess the way I would think when I hear that, like what I think of, I'm not sure if this counts as a public record, but as an example of something like this, a lot of my friends being trans have had to deal with legally changing their name. And due to the way that works, it's by state, but usually you have to like go to your courthouse. And part of that is also like taking out an ad in the paper being like, I'm changing my name from X to Y, because it's like determined that it's important. That's part of like the public record. But like in that specific case, it also like forces people to, give private information out to literally everybody, and they may not want to for whatever reason. And like, you can make arguments for and against all that, but I guess that's what I would imagine is that he probably has some sort of criticism along those lines.
Yeah, but it was about like public records requests from like government entities, which I don't know. I feel like that should be more transparent. But yeah, no, he was talking about things like say you create patient scorecards to rank physicians, and some physicians treat higher risk patients, so therefore the number that comes up for them is lower because their patients have worse outcomes because they were worse coming in. I don't know. Or like anybody who's ever worked in public education. like it's like sometimes the metrics don't measure what you think they do. So yeah, that's it's amazing.
Yeah, no, the metrics are, ask any Zoogler about their OKRs.
Right.
The metrics are terrible. And there's definitely I'm excited to the tyranny of metrics looks great. I think that have you ever heard of principles based accounting versus rules based accounting? My late father-in-law was a professor of accounting in Australia, and he would like to go on some delightful anti-American rants. First among them was our adherence to rules-based accounting. So in the US, we have rules-based accounting, which is like there are a bunch of rules. And so a really good CFO knows how to get around all the rules. And that's not wrong. That's not considered to be, that's not a crime. It's rule. These are the rules. And so you're not actually cheating if you abide by the rules. There's no spirit to abide by. And in principles-based accounting, there are principles, and it is not based on rules. So you can't cheat the principles. And I kind of feel like for this, we would need something that is principles-based, not rules-based, because it's just too easy. As you say, it is way too easy to game. And also, like, we don't want to, like, software engineers as a group are, pretty bright, curious, motivated people. We don't want to take all of that energy and apply it to how to game a bunch of rules, because they will definitely do it. we've got, I think we're going to have to go to something that's principles based. I don't know.
God,
What do you think about
amazing.
all
Yeah,
that?
no, I definitely hear people complain about like compliance-based rules all the time, like people in healthcare. And it's like, cool, you checked off all these boxes, but did it really actually create meaningful change? Like, I don't think that boxes are always bad. Like, some of them can be meaningful. Like, for example, one of the things in the digital standard is like, do you agree to not sue people who like tell you about your bugs or vulnerability like disclosure? Like there's sometimes it does
Yeah.
make sense, but other times it really doesn't. So yeah, no, I like the idea of a principles based approach. I think one of the issues though is that like what if, well, this came up for me in VPNs because I'm like, okay, if I wanted like the ideal VPN, like my principles for what I want, like nobody will do. Like nobody is going to make their like client side and server side code open source, which is like my principles that it should all be, open source and auditable, and like nobody's going to do that. So it's like when I don't know, that's kind of the extreme idealistic version of it, is that I'm like, oh yeah, everybody should do X, Y, and Z, and therefore I can't recommend anything, which is kind of where we're at right now, for many things in memory safety. like I can't recommend any of these, and so like ultimately it's like creating that change. But yeah, how do you, I think that's what a lot of the people in the convening talked about, is like, how do you create incremental change that actually moves the needle, instead of just people saying they're going to do certain things and like not actually, it doesn't actually have impact. They're just checking off a box to get you off their back. Or like we wrote a blog post about memory safety but didn't change anything, so therefore like we can check off our box, and as a company that cares about this issue.
Well, I really like your call on companies to be more transparent about the causes of bugs. I think that is, I would like to, I think we've got to have some way of making clear to those companies that are refusing to participate in CVEs. I don't know how to do that exactly. And I know that there are a lot of problems, Steve, as you alluded to with CVEs, but I do feel that like getting the information about where bugs are coming from is a really important start. An easy way to do that is open source. And as folks know, we very, very pro open source. I believe that open source yields. It feels like this, like, why am I pretending like this is a controversial opinion in 2023? But I think this kind of has become a controversial opinion. Like,
yeah,
it wasn't, but now it is again.
See the episode we did with Stephen O'Grady a while back, where there's sort of people pulling the football, out from under us in terms of open source. And then you've also, not to speak to, not to turn this into a therapy session, but you've been living in a world, the embedded world has lots of proprietary software, and as we go deeper down the hardware, it feels like more and more proprietary software, as opposed to us floating up on the surface.
Yeah, and I do feel, and you call out IoT in here, Yael, but I do feel that a domain that desperately needs the open source and memory safety and memory protection. That kind of, I view that to be the triad of yielding the best, safest possible artifacts. Where you've got a memory safe language and it's open source, and you've got memory protection, which definitely should. As I mentioned, like wasn't that resolved in the 80s? Well, it was resolved in the 80s and 90s and 2000s. For personal computing, for server-side computing, it is definitely not the state of the art, sadly, for embedded development, for IoT, and for other embedded devices. It's actually very unusual to have memory protection. So I think you need those kind of, and I would love to have a way of, at least, can we encourage that triad? Do we have some way of looking at some of these things, and whether they're devices or products or what have you, and just having an idea of where they score on these three things? And I keep I'm deriding metrics, and I can't help myself.
We're a publication that scored products.
Yeah, we do have in the digital standard, in the governance section, there is an open source category that says like, we want to know if the product source code is publicly available and reusable, and like is it under a license approved and listed by the open source initiative, like what type of open source license is it? But I don't know if they have actually used that for, I would have to check with that team. I don't know if that's been actually used for testing, but it's definitely one of the things I look for when we make VPN recommendations. I'm like, is this open source? It's one of the things I look for. So this is another kind of problem, I think, that things can get difficult with any kind of evaluation is that like how do you rank things? Like how do you weight them? Like is this more important than like what's more, how do you like hold them against each other, like open versus transparent, or governance like versus ownership, etc. And it's kind of a hard problem, especially when you're comparing things that aren't exactly like, you can't really compare apples to apples in that situation. So yeah, these are like open questions. Like I feel like a lot of people are kind of talking about it and trying to figure it out, but it might be a while before like it really makes sense.
I definitely agree with all this, but I also want to slightly chase down a small thread that was said earlier that I think, like, why does this feel controversial right now? I think kind of what's interesting, I think I first heard Patrick Walton make this argument, but like, if you look at like the past 20, 30 years, like memory safety has been winning. Like you go back to the 80s, like everything was written in memory unsafe code.
No question.
But like by now, almost everything is by default written in something that is memory safe. So part of the reason why this is so contentious and so difficult is that like this isn't the like start of a battle exactly. This is like finishing the war. This is like capturing the enemy's headquarters stage of the conflict. I don't know. I've been playing too much Call of Duty. I don't know why.
Steve would like to reiterate that he honors anyone who wants to write C++, that when he says that this is rating the compound that has important. C++ dead enders, he's speaking strictly metaphorically.
No, but it's like, it is, and I think that contributes to this like sense of like why this is high stakes and like why people have lots of feelings is because like the scope of where memory unsafe languages have been has just solely been shrinking. And like there was sort of this island of like, well, sometimes you need to use it because you have to because of hardware. And now we're starting to see languages like Rust and other things that are demonstrating that that's not actually like a law of physics. That's just like an accident of history. And so now that like little island that they've been able to live on is under threat. And I totally get why people feel sensitive about that. But I think that's also like a good reminder is that like history is already on the side of memory safety is good and we should do more of it as much as possible.
Totally. I mean, there's almost something Lindy about it, right? Where if you are writing in a memory unsafe language today in 2023, you are almost tautologically at a layer of the stack in which performance is really important.
And also just like a lot of privacy and security stuff like that, too, like tends to be in these languages still. And that's why it's important. Wait, sorry. Yeah, you're best.
Oh no, you're fine. I just keep going back to the number. I'm like 60 to 70% of browser and kernel vulnerability. Like that's ridiculous. Like if somebody told you 60 to 70% of injuries are caused by X, wouldn't you like immediately? Like I make changes in my life. I made a joke about this when I was on the Enigma panel on memory safety, and I was like, I don't take a bath when it's lightning out. Like I make changes based on risk, and this seems like.
Is that actually true? Do you live in a lightning? You live in Arizona, right?
Yeah, but there's a lot of
lightning
we get
in Arizona.
monsoons. Not a lot of them, but yeah, we get.
No, I know, but just like I'm just saying that, like I'm admiring the. I mean, I'm not sure if you're speaking literally.
I'm like very literal. Like I will literally get out of a shower bath during a thunderstorm, because I know that plumbing and other metal can be an electric current conduit, and even though the chance of that happening is very small, it still like changes my behavior. So then if somebody told me 60 to 70% of deaths are caused by lightning or thunder or whatever, like I would definitely I don't know. I feel like you make changes to your behavior based on smaller risks. So that number just keeps coming back to me. And that's why I kept kind of pulling on this thread. I'm like, this is a lot of vulnerabilities. That's a very high percentage,
I would love to know how the average or median age of code that has a vulnerability, because I think the other challenge is a lot of that code is not new. It is at this layer of the stack. I mean, I don't know. Maybe
the Android memory safety article had this statistic in it.
Oh, interesting.
For Android, and they were saying that I think it's like actually the opposite. Like newer code tends to have the most problems. I'm trying to find this exactly, but that's only one. That's like one thing, like one time. But yeah.
To a degree, that's great because Yael, the newer the code is, the more I think you can make that argument of like, stop doing this. Because I think that it's more challenging when you've inherited a code base that it's like, Yeah, I didn't write OpenSSL. I didn't, I have linked to it, and it's something that was written a long time ago and reflects that, and it's been evolved ever since.
Right.
So it ends up,
and that code base is just going to get bigger, right? So why not? But I do think that you can ship at least, like, if you want to ship a component in an existing project in memory safe language, I think that would be valuable, because you could, like, companies would kind of overcome that initial infrastructure investment. So
yeah, you have to have a long-term
I think
thinking.
this is like,
and unfortunately, quarterly reports and stuff.
No, you got to be willing to be mediocre about memory safety to get back to your mediocrity talk, Yael. I'm actually serious, right?
It's a great point, Brian. Just dip a toe in, right? Just go for it, right? It doesn't need to be. You don't need to be an expert on it. You can even getting rid of one bug is enough bugs to get rid of.
there's like,
right, yeah. If you garden, you'll be able to cook yourself. You'll be able to grow food that you can eat. And I think if you write in memory safe languages, you will avoid one defect that you would have had otherwise.
I hope that and I don't know about this because I'm not actually writing code, but I hope that the community would, like, be welcoming and help people who are working on learning how to do this better, instead of, like, gatekeeping. Like, I guess I just don't know enough, but, like, I would hope that that's not a factor. And I don't know if there's anything, like, how do you connect people that need help, like, so that they can implement?
I think it's really important, and I think no one has been more on the forefront of this than Steve. It is very important to be welcoming. I think even despite best efforts, languages are often, it can be inadvertently unwelcoming. And Steve, you've been on a many year mission to make Rust as welcoming
nobody's
as
perfect.
possible.
We got lots of problems too, but it's still better than anything else as far as I'm concerned.
Well, and I do think, Steve, one thing that you have, and maybe I'm just like too inside this and can't see it, but it feels to me, Adam, I'd love to get your take on this. It feels to me, a couple of years ago, there was this idea that, like, Rust had this almost Haskell-like aura of impenetrability. And I feel like this idea, like, oh, Rust is really difficult to learn. Like, once you learn it, it's amazing, but boy, it's really just crushing to learn. And I kind of feel like that has faded. And I don't think it's only because I have learned it since then.
I think let me give you an anecdote as a tipping point indicator. I was at a Super Bowl party yesterday, as one does. Someone was asking what my son was into, and I muttered C++. And this person I'd never met before said, you know what he should check out instead of C++ is Rust. So I feel like...
It takes a village, Adam. It takes a village. Everyone's...
I just feel like there's a certain, like, hurdle you have to get through where kind of folks you're just meeting at Super Bowl parties are spreading the good news.
He wasn't even at my Super Bowl party. That person wasn't even me. So that's also...
It was just one of Steve's faults. It wasn't actually...
I hired someone to go to Adam's party specifically.
I do still hear people complain that Rust is hard to learn. Sorry.
Oh, for sure. And I think that it is. And I think that, you also have this, there's another challenge with Rust. And I'd love to get, and Steve, your take on this as well. I think when you think about Rust pedagogically, I think just as we still teach assembly to undergraduates, I think we have to teach them at some level what memory is and how to be unsafe with it before we can be safe with it. And as the parent of teenagers, this whole line of thinking makes me very nervous, by the way, I don't know, maybe I'm being too traditionalist. Maybe you can't just go straight to Rust. It just feels like it's a very tough first programming language or early programming language. Fortunately, there are other memory safe languages that are I think, going to be easier for those first languages.
My headphones died, and I missed like half of the last sentence of what you said, but I think that maybe I got it, which is like, is it easier to learn Rust when you don't know other languages first or not? Is that where you were going with that? Yeah.
Yeah, how is Rust practical is kind of a first
Okay, so the answer is yes, but with a giant asterisk after it. So for those of you who don't know, I used to like teach Ruby and Rails to both literal children and adults who had never programmed before. A lot of my earlier career was teaching programming like pretty expressly, and like so many people are like, and also my partner Ashley had done this as well, and like she would say that her students who were like high schoolers, like people would say, oh, you should be teaching them JavaScript because it's like easier because there's no types, and she's like, they want types, they like think in types already. Like the idea that there's like a kind of a
Kids
thing,
need structure.
the idea that like there's a kind of a thing and you
Yeah.
don't know what it is like weird,
Totally.
basically. And so I think that there's like a lot of people, like a lot of programmers don't appreciate the degree to which knowing how to program has like warped their understanding of what it's not like to know how to program. And their estimation of what is difficult versus what is easy is wrong, because what's difficult or easy for someone who's been programming for 10 years is not the same as someone who's brand new. I think types is a great example. I don't think that every type system is equivalent. That's a whole big giant can of worms, obviously. But to get back to like what I said specifically, like the giant asterisk on Rust. So there's not a lot of good materials for learning Rust as your first programming language right now. And so that's like one example where I think it's just not the case. Like there's no book that's like teach programming via Rust. Some people try to say that my book is that. I disagree with them. We like assume that you know how to write code and text in an editor and compile it and like run it and stuff, or we show you how, but like we don't explain, okay, to do a programming, you need to open a text editor and edit a file and then, run it through like all that stuff like has to be taught, right?
Yeah, right.
And
all
so there's no resource
that
that does that with Rust specifically. I do think that for a particularly kind of motivated student with a certain kind of mentality, temperament or something, like you can. And like I know there are people who have learned Rust as a first language, and I know some people that have like helped supplement that lack of express resources by like just teaching them or like answering questions or like helping out, and they've generally said that they have found that those people have learned Rust relatively easily because they just like don't know any different. And so the idea of these rules that are so weird that mess up your existing designs, like people don't have those existing designs, so they just learn how to write code that works with the compiler instead of against it from the start. And so it ends up being like faster.
Like, sorry, what is a doubly linked list?
Right, exactly.
I don't even know what that
they're
is.
Not evaluating
God,
the programming language based on whether or not they can write a linked list because they don't even know what that is.
So exactly. You could be like, how could a doubly linked list even exist? What are you talking about?
Like, what is it even? That's like
walk me through it.
So that's basically like what I would say about like learning Rust as a beginner or like as a new programmer is like, if you really want to, I think you can do it. I don't think it's something I would like recommend to the average newbie who's learning to program today, but I don't think that means it's impossible for the future.
Oh, there should be a Rust version of to out myself as someone learning Python. I'm doing the Georgia Tech, the David Joyner class online on introduction. It's actually like about fundamentals of computer science, and they said they wanted to add other languages.
Nice.
Yeah, and so to give somebody random extra work, it would be so cool if this also had Rust. I mean, I don't know. It's pretty good. It's a really good program.
Yeah,
I feel like I've gotten further than I have in this one online program than all my other past attempts.
Well, that's great. First of all, that's great. Good on you and terrific. And it does feel, I mean, in part because Rust, in part because of just its relatively young age, it does have fewer historical kind of warts that are hard to explain. It's like, no, sorry, you just have to do this. Like, we'll explain it in a Hopple paper a while from now. Don't worry about it. Just do it. It feels to me like there's less of that stuff. And yeah, it would be interesting, Steve, to like
less but non-zero.
And maybe Yael, you should do this experiment. Maybe you should do this experiment on yourself, Yael. You could actually go. Have they talked about? I wonder if someone has taken. If someone attempted to take an introductory course, the Georgia Tech course, have they talked about actually doing it?
I don't think they have a lot
Rust
of
versus Python.
Hopefully I'm not wrong on this, but like in the course, they'll be like, here's how this concept applies to all these other languages. And I'm not sure they have Rust even on the list. I don't know how old this course is, but hopefully I'm not wrong on that. But yeah.
I can't hear, embarrassingly. I'm so sorry. I'm no interrupting you. I can't hear, so I'll deal with my audio. I'll be back in a second.
Brian, still uses Linux, so he's got a lot of audio problems. I can make that joke because he can't currently hear me. So
Yeah, here calling in here from.
Dang
I can actually do that.
Dad's back.
I am going to be coming into work tomorrow. If you want to have a meeting, it's like fine. I get
yeah. Are you? Yeah. Do you have availability tomorrow? Just checking. Oh, no, it's fine. We'll talk about it tomorrow. I don't want to talk
before
about
the all hands, not after the all hands.
But
okay.
Yeah. If you
should
could
just send them like a late night message being like, "I need to talk to you."
Yeah.
Exactly. No. That was actually. I was feeling something very unusual for me, which is Linux is being unfairly maligned, and I must rush to defend it. I had actually just in my enthusiasm, I just yanked my jack out of the wall and couldn't figure out where the plug was. So that was purely just me being a doof. Yeah, exactly. So one question I wanted to ask you was around just you bring up these really interesting historical analogs of talking about Upton Sinclair in the Jungle and Ralph Nader and Unsafe at Any Speed, and how we got some public recognition on these things. And as I look at certainly our food safety, medical safety, aviation safety, regulatory bodies played a really important role in that. And I personally I think no entity has done more for aviation safety than the National Transportation Safety Board. And there's a kind of a famous and ongoing tension between the NTSB and the FAA, and the NTSB views the FAA as actually being too beholden to the kind of commercial airlines. Is there first of all, as we look from potentially regulatory solutions, is there an NTSB equivalent that we could do here? Because that to me would be potentially interesting.
That's such a good question. I mean, I feel like there's so many different organizations that think that they're in charge of or have varying levels of responsibility, I should say. Like there's so many different US government groups that think that like their mandate includes cybersecurity, and it probably does. So I don't know. Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know exactly how that would happen. Like is it going to be the cybersecurity strategy out of the Office of the National Cyber Director? Is it going to be? I know that like CISA and NSA have given some guidance, but yeah, I don't know. I'm interested to see how that plays out too. I don't really have any predictions.
One, I don't know if this is like an overall possibility, but just like an interesting angle of this happening was when Facebook was going to be making that cryptocurrency, they got dragged out in front of the government, and was it an FBI director, a senator, or somebody had like asked them like, this is like they're doing the whole person being interrogated by the government thing, and you tune in. And you got the senator, whoever, being like, "I see you're using a nightly version of the Rust programming language. Are you taking engineering of this thing seriously? Like, how can we trust you?" And we all in like the Rust world were like, "Holy crap! Like, this is a government official like caring about the difference between the nightly versus non-nightly, release chain or whatever." So, like that thing happens sometimes, and I think that was like, they're doing this like security angle, but yeah.
The FTC. Yep. It could be the FTC. I don't know. There's like what if I don't know. It's a good question, and I don't know, so I'm speculating. But like, what if, like, can failure to use memory safe programming techniques be considered an unfair or deceptive business practice? By putting people at unnecessary risk of hacks due to memory exploitation that would have otherwise been stopped. Like, I don't know, maybe.
Adam joked about the SEC in the chat, and I replied with a Matt Levine thing, which is everything is securities fraud. And like he, often talks about how companies will sort of, get sued because if they say in their quarterly earnings, call or whatever that like, their products are secure, and then like the next week they get hacked and their stock goes down, then is that like defrauding investors because your product isn't as good as you were? Kind of like that sort of stuff happens. So maybe we'll see a hedge fund try to take out a giant short position about someone's memory unsafety.
Oh my god, I would be so terrified to say. It's like saying like your product isn't hackable. Like that's like the most dangerous thing to say.
Tamper-proof is the other one. If you really want to like bring out everybody, say that your product is tamper-proof because it definitely is.
Yeah, I had a kind of wild one along these SEC lines where we talked about the companies and their engineers and employees. We talked about consumers and consumer awareness, and then about governance. But there's also the ownership of companies in the form of like shareholders and shareholder actions. And is that another way to kind of you talk about theory of change? Is that another way to make progress where say Apple or Microsoft shareholders, you talk about Apple and Microsoft in the piece, could say, asking for the board of directors to make commitments or asking for leadership to make commitments around, these kinds of vulnerabilities, around progress for memory safety. Kind of a wild one, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on it.
Oh my God, that's fascinating. That's a fascinating idea. Yeah, I think you'd have to really make the business case. Like, this. I don't know if we'd need more examples or what, but like this will save you, money in the long run. That's super, super interesting.
Let's just agree to not pull a Paul Graham and try to like talk about the September 11th of memory safety or whatever, because that was in poor taste.
Oh, no comment.
You don't remember this, Brian? Literally in September of 2001, he tried to talk about like Lisp is cool because you can keep code and data separate, and therefore a buffer overflow doesn't happen. Just like someone buffer overflowing their way into the pilot seat of a plane, which is just like literally in September of 2001.
Oh,
so it's just really goodness. Like, yeah. Anyway,
that's awful.
That's not effective.
Well,
advocacy.
I definitely. What, Steve? I'm no longer a Paul Graham fan. Yeah, not a fan of his anymore. That's it. You turned me.
That's it. Last straw. That's the last straw. It definitely was not his tweet today implying that no one should trust journalists. Yeah. That has got nothing to do with it. But this does no. That is
Mastodon. Or is he back on Twitter now?
He's back on Twitter now.
Okay.
No, he's back on Twitter. That unfortunately, that was the Musk unfortunately backtracked when he actually left. That was actually the breaking point for Musk, and he realized that he was actually which was unfortunate.
But the other thing I was going to say was like, why pick one organization? Why not just have all of these people enforce memory safety? Like, who needs just one government body to make sure this happens? Let's just get them all, and then like at least one of them will end up doing it right. Like.
Yeah, and I would like it to not be punitive and kind of shame and enforcement based, if at all possible, just because I don't know that that's practical. I would love it to find a way to be principles based and best practices based. And hey, this is going to allow you to build better artifacts faster, which is true, right? And I think that, what can we do to go? I mean, it's like you wonder, in terms of society's scarce resources, should we spend that on an enforcement body, a regulatory body, or should we spend that on promoting education standards that do have Rust as a first language? I do kind of wonder. I mean, this is it is a bit of carrot versus stick. As Adam, as I think you observed to me once many years ago, it's like you can kind of beat people with a carrot. Like, wow, that carrot really hurts. Actually, what is that carrot made of? That carrot.
Speak softly. And
ouch!
Hold a big carrot.
Yeah, I mean, but I do think it's like you want to find a way to get people there without shame and punishment, but we also we kind of need to know that this stuff is important and you need to get there. It's not just enough to kind of wander your way over here in terms of memory safety.
So much of education is short-circuiting experience. And I think, Brian, you were telling me about Canadian engineers wearing the iron ring. Am I remembering that correctly? Can you?
Yeah.
I remember vaguely the history of that, but.
I mean, any Canadian here, and I'm sure there are plenty, is like they've got "Oh Canada" going through their heads right now. I mean, this is the iron ring that engineers wear from the collapsed bridge in Quebec, and it is putatively made of this collapsed bridge to remind all engineers of their obligations to society. And there is a terrific podcast on exactly this, and I'll drop in the channel. But yeah, so no, this is an important part of a Canadian engineering education, and you wear that iron ring. Yeah, are you suggesting that software engineers should wear? We should have.
We need the iron ring of unsafety, right? The kind of watershed moments that kind of short circuit that experience, right? Because that's the point of this. Not that everyone needs to build a bridge that falls down, but rather everyone should learn from this historical moment.
We should have memory safety challenge coins.
Sanji.
It's been 5 years since I've written unsafe code.
People will do anything for challenge coins. That's
That's okay. No, this is a great. We need memory safety challenge coins, and then so yeah. How because it feels like challenge coins seem like they're a bigger thing in the public sector. Am I making that up? Wait, could you describe a bit of like how challenge coins are used?
Oh my God, I didn't realize that they were like super special until somebody got mad at me because he said he would trade me something for one, and I gave him some stickers and took the coin, and he yelled at me at a DEF CON like many years ago. And I'm like, oh, this is like important and special. But I don't know. I feel like the ones I've gotten, it's for like you actually have to do something to get them. Like either like actually solve a challenge or like I've gotten them for speaking. But I don't know. Like people collect them and display their coins. But then people will just give them out sometimes too, where they're like, I don't want to take these home. Or just like kind of randomly hand them out. But I know it has military origins. I know it's like used differently in the military where like there's like a hierarchy of coins and like you have to buy a round if somebody pulls out a coin. If you pull out a coin, then somebody has to buy you a drink, but if somebody has a higher coin, then they have to you have to buy everybody drinks or something. Like I don't know.
It's a PvP MMO. I understand now.
But I haven't gotten one in like I have a little collection and I'm like I think I need to get a few more to be able to display it. And like I don't know. And then I also like feel guilty when people just give me one when I hadn't earned it. They're like, "Oh, like we had challenge coins for everybody who solved this really hard crypto challenge, but we don't feel like taking them home, so here take one." I'm like, I didn't earn the coin.
I do love the idea of Steve having Ferris challenge coins that he can give out to those that he feels. And then you got like what would we have kind of to protect safely or something. I'm trying to think like what is going to be the embossment on the Rust challenge coin. I think it's a good idea though. It's like you need those kinds of incentives, right? You think like that is. What is the origin of that? This is like a small token, but it's meaningful to people because it represents something substantial that they've actually done. Like, can we do things like that? And that's, Adam, to your point about the iron ring, it's like the iron ring is meaningful. And what can we do that would be meaningful to say, hey, yes, you have made this commitment to the craft, to implementing in a safe language. Maybe there's an oath. I don't know.
We'll workshop that.
Good point though about having incentives instead of just getting yelled at for writing and seeing.
Yeah, I think you do. I think that you need some incentives, and I think you can, structure. And even from a regulatory perspective, I think you need to structure that as incentives. We just went through this FCC compliance the exercise, and which we talked about last week, which was really interesting and educational for me. Part of what I actually like about that is it is a bit of a nuanced process because they know that there's no practical way for the FCC to audit everything that you ship and to put everything that you ship in a chamber. It's like that's not going to work. So they've got to find a different kind of a process where they've got these private bodies that insurers trust, and then they evaluate you. And it felt like a more nuanced process, but didn't lose its kind of quantitative artifacts. It's like you have to achieve these kind of quantified goals. So I'm not sure if that's an analog or not, but it does feel like there is some kind of public-private partnership that is possible here.
I do wonder too if I think the transparency has a big Like if you say you bring your percentage of bugs like down from 70, 80 of memory safety bugs down to like a lower level because of this implementation, but nobody's going to know that if you don't make those statistics public. And just posting statistics like we've seen is like meaningless when people are like, oh, I posted publicly that 90% of our staff are white men or whatever. Like just posting that isn't like enough. Yeah, so it's
Right.
interesting.
Yeah, when just the earlier point about the tyranny of metrics, but it feels like, I think all of this starts with, I think, getting more public attention on this issue and allowing more people to kind of appreciate this. We get hopefully Rust brought up at more Super Bowl parties. So Steve, good going on your alt there. We got to get. But Yael, the work you're doing is really essential here, and thank you very much for being willing to get a bunch of practitioners in the room and find a forum where they could kind of give you unvarnished information, and then you could collect that. And I think what you kind of self-disparagingly called it that it said it was not capital J journalism, but this is a great piece that you've got here. And I think on behalf of all software engineers would encourage you to thank you for it and to encourage you to explore more in this vein, because there's a lot of good.
Thank you. Yeah, and if people have ideas about what we should be doing and some of the things we talked about on here, I'm definitely would love to hear them.
Well, I think mediocre memory safety has got to be. That would be my challenge. I will give you this Rustation challenge coin if you can give a talk on mediocre memory safety.
I'd love that talk.
I think it'd be great. Well, Yael, thank you very, very much for joining us. We really appreciate it. And hopefully you'll can come back and good luck with your future work. And hopefully, are you going to continue to do work in the kind of this vein? I mean, have you gotten good feedback on this? And is this stuff you're going to do more of?
Really great. Like we got more of a response than I expected. So I definitely want to keep working on this, and of course other things like it. And yeah, thank you so much for your being in, I don't know, this is really cool. I listened to your podcast last week and I was like, wow. Like I don't usually get that kind of feedback, so it was pretty cool.
Did you feel that I say God bless too frequently? Because there are certain people in this room who remain nameless who believe that I say God bless.
Nobody said too frequently. You know what? It's just frequently. Frequently.
I think, and okay. Technically, you merely asked me the question. Do you know how frequently you say God bless?
Tonight, you've moved to good on ya, and that's not escaped my attention.
I often say good on you. I feel is that my view? Is this another one of these things that I'm the only one that says?
I think I've maybe heard another person say it before, probably.
You've heard another person's. Well, good on them.
I'm not sure how good the quality of the audio was.
Bless you all.
I don't think that they sounded like a millennial podcast when they were saying it, though. So really, yeah.
Exactly. I was just happy you didn't ask me any questions about unikernels. So that's my feedback.
Exactly. Yeah. God bless unikernels and good on you, Rust. All right.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.